those guys will figure it out. All right, so let's just go ahead and jump in. We got about 30 minutes, and we want to finish out today with our lecture topic. In your textbook reading for this week, we are in week 6. We're looking at the cultural landscape of North America. So the textbook reading, chapters, I think it's 6 and 7, I believe. And I'm also putting the page numbers in Blackboard now, so in case you have a Kindle or something, you should be able to find the page numbers a little bit better. But basically, core in your reading is going to cover some kind of shifts and trends that are happening in North American culture. Try to give you an idea of some things that are changing and happening. So I'm not going to kind of recap a lot of what he's saying because he's going to say it, and I like how he always ends with the missiological implications and what it looks for. But I really like chapter 7. He starts to talk about with the heading is looking for America, in quotes, multicultural and demographic changes. Okay, so we're not going to talk a whole lot about that in the class period because he's going to cover that really well about how we were a nation of immigrants and who settled first here, but really with this melting pot and that sort of thing, that kind of whole idea, whether it's right or wrong, and some missiological implications as well. But he has a very interesting subsection in that chapter on what are we, a nation of Christians or a Christian nation? It is an ongoing debate, and I have my viewpoint on that, which we can go into if we get there. But he actually says, he asked the question, is America Christian or not? The answer is both yes and no. So I would say that, though I lean far heavily to no. I don't think that America was founded as a Christian nation as much as our history books and as much Christians would like to think. I think they had a somewhat of a respect for God, but to say that we were founded as a Christian nation, if that were the case and we were strictly a theocracy almost, if we were strictly a Christian nation, then I think the founding fathers would have written the Constitution that way. It allows for freedom of religion, though there are a lot of Christian undertones. So anyways, that's the whole thing. You probably need to debate with Mr. Moore about that because he is a lot more wise in that. So anyways, there are some key things, some key shifts, urbanization, different things like that he talks about, economic disparity. So some of those things we're not going to cover a lot in this class period. But I do want to give you kind of a snapshot of something. Now, no, this is not exhaustive. We can have a whole class, 3 credit hours, 20 credit hours. We can have a whole class, even a degree, on understanding the cultural landscape of North America and its implications. So we've got 30 minutes to cover what we could cover in 30 weeks, okay? But I think what is really important that's going to help for this class is if we can kind of work through and understand some of the macro, some of the big picture things that are happening in North America right now and some of the shifts and trends, if we can understand those, that'll give us a framework to understand why some individuals are making decisions how they are. Okay, so we're going to talk about pluralism. Well, that affects how an individual starts saying, well, that's right for me, but not for you, or vice versa. So anyways, we're going to kind of get into that. And the very last bit we'll discuss, we'll kind of go into some more micro things. How are some of these big issues and trends and shifts affecting your family? Okay, so just a few of those. We really can't cover a whole lot, but if you're thinking this way, what you'll be able to do as a cultural exegeticist, church planter, pastor, whatever, disciple maker of whatever stripe, when you step in and you're learning people, if you have a background of some big things to remember, and we have given you the tools to understand individuals, then you'll be able to kind of understand the community that you're ministering in a little bit better. So what I will say looks like is very broad and all-encompassing, so it kind of is, but just know that not every single person that lives in the United States or in Canada, North America, has a postmodern worldview. Not at all. So we can't say this North America is 100% this. We can say these are some big trends happening that are shaping America. So cultural landscape of North America. Oh, so here is our beautiful North America. All right, Charlie, do you see the slides okay?
Yeah, I can see him.
All right, perfect. Um, so North America is essentially U.S., Canada, and Mexico. For the purpose of this class, we're not going to talk a lot about Mexico simply because if you're going to be a church planter to the country of Mexico, then you would do better in studying cross-cultural international missions than North American missions. Largely because it's a different language and a largely different cultural perspective than the U.S. and Canada. But we're going to talk mainly today about the U.S. and Canada. So when I talk about North America, and whenever we designed this class, we had in mind both the U.S. and Canada. We didn't really have in mind just the 50 United States. Okay, and so as we talk about North America, for us, because we all live in the states, we're going to feel and understand it more, but want this to be applicable to someone if we had a student that was living in Calgary, Alberta, Canada one day, for instance. So there are some things that really are reflective in both, but since I have a little bit more experience now with Canadian culture from some visits and conversations, I'll kind of speak into that as well. And the reason why I wanted to show a geographical picture is that when we talk cultural landscapes, a lot of times you can break it down into geography um, and kind of see what are the trends happening that are geographic to a country. Landscape affects things, and so one thing that I learned just a few weeks ago is that people who live in more winter, snowy, cold climates, their daily and yearly lives are very different. You know, when you're in most of Canada, your winter is anywhere from 6 to 9 months long. So, like in Calgary, they're like, we can get snow in September, and it can snow in May. Well, we don't have that here. We have like a 3 month window here in North Carolina. They have a 6 to 9 month window. So like spring for them is the month of June, summer is the month of July, fall is the month of August. The rest is winter. All right. So it changes how you live. They design homes differently. A Canadian home has a mud room because you're most of the year you're walking in muddy snow with boots on. So every home has a mudroom built. Not every home in the U.S. has that. Now some up in the Northeast will have that. Homes in Montana may have that. So geography does play a lot. Now we're not going to talk a lot about geography, but just know that we have so the regions for the United States. You have the South and the Southeast, which is where we are. Basically, Texas, Oklahoma, um, Kentucky, Virginia down. All right. Then you have the Northeast, which is New York, Boston, Massachusetts, Maine, Pennsylvania. You have the Midwest, so you're looking at Illinois, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the Dakotas, and then you have kind of the mountain range areas, which are part of the Midwest, but getting more towards west, Colorado, Utah, those areas, and then you have the Pacific Coast and the West, Oregon, California, Washington, Nevada. And of course, Alaska would be part of the West as well. And Canada has a very similar thing. Canada has East, the plains in the middle, the mountain region in the West. And so very, very similar. But, and when we're talking about church planting, if you follow the North American Mission Board, which I do since being a Southern Baptist, they've actually broken their strategy down into identifying key cities in each of those sections or each of those regions, they call them. And it's like for the South, there's only 3 cities in the South that they're targeting, and it's really based on percentage of lostness and number of churches. So the higher the percentage of lost people, and the lower percentage of churches gets more funding and resources for church planting through the North American Mission Board. All right. So, for instance, if we wanted to plant a church here in Winston-Salem, I cannot get any money or funding from the North American Mission Board. They would love what we were doing. They would support it and even give some resources like training and that sort of thing. But they would not help support you financially because it is a more reach city than Boston, than Las Vegas, than Portland, some other places. So the Northeast has a high number of cities. So you think in the South, the cities that they have identified with the greatest need are New Orleans, Miami, and Atlanta. Just those 3. The Northeast, though, you got Boston, New York City, Baltimore, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Washington, D.C. Oh gosh, there's a few more. I think there's 1 or 2 more. Then you move to the Midwest, you have Columbus, Ohio, you have Cincinnati, you have St. Louis, you have Detroit, you've got there's not any in Texas. Texas has a lot of churches in most areas. St. Paul, Minneapolis, St. Paul. Then you move over. You have Denver, Colorado Springs area. You got Las Vegas. You've got Salt Lake City, Utah, which Provo, Utah. Salt Lake and Provo are kind of the same area in one sense, but Provo, Utah is the most unreached city in North America with 0.5% evangelical Christian. There are dozens of Muslim nations that have a higher percentage of Christians than the city of Utah, Provo, Utah, which is phenomenal. It's the most unreached. That in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, both at 0.5%. Calgary, to give you perspective, is 5%. Winston-Salem is right around 35 to 40%. So, anyways, numbers tell. Then you move to the West Coast, you have cities like Los Angeles, San Francisco, some of those things. Yeah. And Seattle, of course, Seattle, Portland. All right. So, geographically, well, why are there so few in the Southeast? Well, there's a lot higher percentage of churches in the Southeast than there are in the Northeast. Evangelical churches. A lot more believers percentage in the Southeast than there are in the Northeast or even the West. And so geographically, there are some changes and some things to really note about how even geography has affected the church landscape. I want to talk a little more on the philosophical side today and go through these kind of quickly. So here's some key shifts that, and these are not exhaustive. These are just, I think, 5 or 6 that I have. Just a few of the key shifts that are affecting many other areas of life. Okay, so it's not exhaustive, but these are highly important. So here are some of the I did just narrow it down to 5. Here are 5 of the key shifts that I think are just really the macro shifts. They're kind of happening on a bigger picture scale, and so you'll see them reflected more in academic institutions, government, and some of those bigger spheres of culture, as we talked last week, than your local family, for instance. Some of these touch local communities, but these are more bigger picture. You'll see Hollywood will reflect these macro shifts more than it will reflect what my local little city is doing, or even what my family is doing, so to speak. So here's one of the 5 macro shifts: going from Christendom to post-Christian, going from modern to the postmodern or even post-postmodern worldview. Going from local to global, where one author, Bob Roberts, he wrote a book called Glocal. He says we are now entering this global period where we are global yet local at the same time. So we can have a Google Hangout right now with people from 8 other countries and us in this class, which has never been able to happen before. You can have friends and keep up with them on a pretty regular basis through digital media, different social media, texting and whatnot, that live in other countries. I have a missionary friend in India right now. I get a weekly email from the guy, and he can still text me stuff. And we'll text prayer requests and different things, how I'm praying for him, his ministry, and he's in India. Going from paper to digital. You're like, well, that's just more of a, a functionality thing. That's more of just not using as many trees and having more access for books online. Well, it's bigger than that. It's bigger than that. It's actually shaping how we view friendships now. We don't write letters to friends. We send them a text, so which is more meaningful. And it's changing our definition of many things. And then the other macro shift is a generational, going from boomers to Gen X leading things to now millennials and what's next. All right, so Christendom to post-Christian. Let's kind of talk about a few of the ways it has affected broader spheres. So how has it affected local churches? Now Christendom, think of Constantine. The church is now running the state. Okay, so that was Christendom. So wherever basically Catholicism spread over the whole world when it did, because Rome conquered the whole world, the Crusades and all that sort of thing. And so it didn't necessarily mean that people were becoming followers of Christ. It meant that if the Roman army came in, you became Christian. Not necessarily because there were a lot of forced conversions. There were a lot of the king of the small little nation being overtaken would basically say, okay, we'll become Christians as long as you don't kill us all. Well, that's not really converting and going from unjust to just and being sanctified by Christ. So that's Christendom. But now we've entered this era where we're post-Christian. Christendom really set a foundational values layer for people to think, well, we need to consider what the Bible says in making policies, in structuring our business, in running things. Christendom taught people that we start with Scripture. That's not a bad thing. Sometimes they were just straight fearful of God because the priest told them that if they didn't give so much money, they'd be in purgatory forever. All right. So there are some negative aspects, but the positives are that it did get them thinking. Let's start from the Bible before we do things. Post-Christian says, well, we don't need Scripture. The human mind has evolved so far. We are so far advanced. We actually don't need God anymore, and so we're in a post-Christian state now. We here, if you live here in North Carolina, which I think everyone in this class is either in North or South Carolina, we really don't feel post-Christianity very much. You don't feel it. You need to go to a place like Boston or Portland here in the States or New York City to feel post-Christian. If you really, really want to see where New York City will be in 10 years, go visit London, England. England has been post-Christian for decades. Now, Canada is even a decade past where most of North America, most of the United States is, because Canada was always loyal to the crown. And so even culturally and economically, they mirrored what London was doing. So they were loyal to the Queen, they did all that. So as the church, that's why there's such a huge need for churches in Canada. And it's because there's even a bigger need for churches in the UK. And so now we don't start with the basis of what does Scripture say. Well, we have a strong government. We're making good policies. Marriage is now redefined to include everybody. Gender is now not even a conversation, and so why do we? So, but if you have that conversation, like if a Londoner or someone from Toronto went to my hometown in Rockingham, North Carolina, 2 hours south of here, and they went to a barbershop, and they said anything about gay marriage, you'd have 3 guys who are deacons at their Baptist church pull out their pistol and say what? Son, you ain't from around here, you better go back. That would happen. All right? My local community does not understand post-Christianity. All right? Now, being here in Winston-Salem area, even for me, has exposed me to a little bit more because, you usually find these shifts happen in the bigger cities first. All right? So New York City is way past where Charlotte, Raleigh, Durham, even Miami are. But Atlanta is slowly getting there. It's not near as far, but Boston, New York City, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Los Angeles, San Francisco, some of those places, they're becoming very post-Christian. Toronto, Montreal, Quebec City, Vancouver, Calgary. The 2 times I've been in Calgary, I have started to actually, in conversation, now have tasted and seen what post-Christianity looks like. So, for instance, talking to a girl in a restaurant, she was a waitress. She asked what we were doing there in the city, and the guy was with us. Oh, we're visiting some churches and pastors and encouraging them and doing different things. And he says, so do you have a church that you go to? And she goes, well, I'm open to a lot of things, but I have visited many churches, and I always like my experience. Okay, great. And so he said, well, what churches have you been to? Now, if I were to ask you, Matt, that question, you would say, well, I've been to Harvest Bible Chapel, High Point. I've been to Revo Church in Winston. I've been to Redeemer Presbyterian, Calvary Baptist. We would think Christian churches, right? Not this lady. She goes, oh, I've been to the Catholic Church. I've been to the Buddhist Church. I've been to the Muslim Church. I've been to the, what was the other one? To the Christian Church. And we're like, those aren't churches, like only one of those groups even call what they have a church. It's a temple or a mosque or something else. Even mass, you don't say you go to church, you go to mass in Catholicism.
Put them all.
Exactly.
It's just religions.
And they all have value, and they all go to the same place. So for her religion, her spirituality is a buffet line. You know what? I'm kind of feeling some Catholicism this week, so I might go visit mass with my Catholic friend. You know what? I'm really feeling some nirvana. I think I'm going to hang out with my Buddhist friend next week, And so we kind of pick and choose. So that's even affecting how people think. And so here on the list, just a few of things that how the Christendom to post-Christian shift is affecting local churches. Local churches are no longer seen. I was just reading a blog post last night. I'll have to share it. The guy was talking about space, religion and space, how there was a big shift forever from Catholicism on where we built big church buildings. There used to be ordinances in many North American towns that you could not build a building higher than the steeple of the church. Why? Because the church was an important building. It had prominence in the community. People would know that they knew that there was good and that God was there, so to speak. So there were actually laws in many places that said you can't build a building taller than the steeple. Well, go to downtown Winston. The smallest building you're going to see in downtown is the church buildings. All right? But now we've even shifted the last 2 decades where we don't build a lot of church buildings. We renovate an old warehouse or we do something else. And so that's a whole other conversation. But this shift is really affecting what local churches do. The view of the pastor in the community. Pastor used to be, if you watch Mayberry, you talk to the pastor, he was well respected by everybody. Even if the person who didn't go to church respected the pastor when they walked by, they knew that this person deserved some reverence. This is the pastor. They had the mayor could call on the pastor and trust them to give wise counsel. Now, they're scrutinized and they're basically, you couldn't get a real job, so you're a pastor. All right, whatever. All right, or you're a religious fanatic. This shift has affected religion and politics. Okay, so definitely, as we have seen, and this is why the U.S. has just now passed a law about same-sex marriage, where Canada did that decades ago. The U.K. decades ago. We're just now doing it. So we're a little bit behind in this shift, but we're shifting. We're rapidly going that direction. Diversity of religions. We have a lot more because we are becoming more post-Christian. It's opening up for other religions to have a stage. And the rise of nuns, those who have no religion. So the cities in the U.S., places like Boston, New York City, some of the Northeast, I think Portland, Seattle in the same way, they have about 25% in this, according to the census data, say that their religion is no religion, so a none. All right. Here in Winston-Salem, we're probably closer to the 15 to 20% would say that. Calgary, Alberta, Canada, where I was, 33%.
Just from my experience with family stuff in Seattle, with what Christian churches that do thrive in Seattle for the most part, or liberal ones, clearly, that's everywhere in the country now, to be honest, I guess you could say. But especially what I've noticed on the West Coast, maybe, and I know each city is different, but what I've noticed in Seattle, to be honest, is ones that are focused on social justice.
Yeah. Yep.
Because Seattle's very big on that, and to me, Seattle's always been a very literate city too. It's voted year in year out as one of the most literate cities in the U.S.
Right.
To where you read a lot of philosophy. To where I think that a lot of Seattle, from what I've noticed, a lot of Christians who may be Christian, but because of their teaching's been so focused on gospel, instead of focusing on gospel, it's focused on social issues. And I've noticed that versus here in the South, it's get saved and be a good person and help your neighbor and all that. But there, it's very, minorities are marginalized, or businesses are the reason, or cheating people and stuff like that. Labor unions, stuff like that. It's very.
So even that goes back to the geographic conversation. How even different geographies have different percentages based on its history, and so we can really put this lecture in the cultural analysis or the historical perspective part of the quadrant. It really bleeds into both because this is really talking about historical shifts that happen culturally. So it's a good point. The next big shift, modern to postmodernism. If you want to understand modernism, talk to your grandma or great-grandma. If you want to understand postmodern, talk to yourself and your friends. All right. Our parents are kind of caught in the middle. My parents would be far more modern. I have a lot of friends whose parents would be far more postmodern, especially they were a little more hippie back in the 70s than they would care to admit today. But we talk about modern and postmodern. Too many volumes of books have been written on the subject. But it does, one of the biggest shifts that we have seen into becoming postmodern, which postmodernity really started post-World War II, because World War II crushed modernism's dream that the authority, that we can trust our authorities, because Hitler was an authority. We can't trust him anymore. It really kind of shattered their optimism as a modern thinking people, because modernism really is tied into science. Science blossomed in modernism because it says we can figure it out. Modernism said we can figure out what is happening, and we can get to truth by applying scientific principles. Okay, for a lot of things you can do that too. So modernism, but then World War II, the Cold War shattered that. It basically like, man, everyone is messed up, and there must be multiple ways to do things. So what happened? Truth became more relative. So we have the biggest results of this shift is this pluralism, or the relativity of truth. So now truth is relative to who you are, where you're from, and who you're talking to. So Matt, you're from your hometown, you're from your specific family. So truth is now up to you to figure out, based on your history, your point of view, your desires, your wishes, your dreams, everything else. It is relative. All right. Now, what happens is when you say, "Well, I believe it is okay for two men to be married." Well, if truth was actually relative, you can actually make that claim because truth is relative. But truth is absolute. There are truths, and we get our absolute truths from Scripture. Now, here's where you can have fun with a true postmodernist who wants to say that every truth is relative. Okay, so sitting across from a guy, he says, "Oh, well, all truth is relative." Punch that guy in the face as hard as you can. Then he says, "Why'd you do that?" And you say, "Well, the truth is for me, punching people in the face makes me happy." Well, that's not my truth. Well, sorry, it is mine. Based on if truth really is relative, he should be okay with getting punched in the face because it's whatever makes you feel good, right? The problem is truth. If truth is relative, there's always a dangerous aftermath. He got hit in the face and it hurts now. That's a bad aftermath because of his relativity of truth. It always hurts somebody. And so now what we have is being called now more postmodern. It's really just postmodernism amplified because a postmodern society with pluralism, relativity of truth cannot stand. It can't. All right. So because it cannot stand, we are now in this constant pursuit of finding out the band-aids and the fixes to all of our relative truths. And we can't get there because you're not going to find 320 million people to agree on one thing. We have to agree on what God says. The other thing with the modern and postmodern shift, it changed authority. Who is the authority now? Used to, the pastor was the authority. The president was the authority. Now, it's not. Who is the authority? It's changed even our view of books and literature. Should the author get to determine what his text meant, or should the English comp or the literature students at the University of Wisconsin sitting with a nutty professor who says, you know what, we can rewrite what Dickens wrote. We get to determine what Charles Dickens wrote in A Tale of Two Cities. No, the author had an intent, just like in Scripture. And then we even had the whole emerging church conversation, the missional church conversation, which we don't really have time to. Luckily, the emerging church whole conversation has died. No one talks about it anymore. Their blog is dead.
We discussed that more.
Thankfully, yeah. Yeah. All right, so quickly, I got just a few minutes to kind of wrap up, but another macro shift going from local to global. We talked about that a little bit. Travel has changed. Flights, are getting faster, that sort of thing, and cheaper and whatnot. So travel is a lot easier. You don't have to be on a boat for 5 months to get across an ocean. Communication, I can right now call someone in another country and it connects in a matter of seconds. I can Skype with a guy in China, which I've done before. It's kind of cool. He's a professor. He's Chinese in America, but he was in China when I Skyped him. So it was kind of fun. So communication has changed. Computers has linked us now through digital media, social media, and even academia. It is now highly celebrated for you to travel abroad and study at other schools. You have a lot of international students coming here just on a student visa to study here in America, and a lot of our students are now starting to go overseas, places like Dubai. We had a student in my gospel community at church who is a Wake Forest undergrad in computer science and graphic design, and spent last spring in Dubai, studying at a university there in Dubai. So that's even kind of shifting. Paper to digital, it's changed publications, book sales. I just saw an article the other day that for the first quarter since the Kindle and e-readers came out, for the first time since then, paper books have sold more than digital books. And I think what we're seeing, these are all trends. So what you'll notice is we'll get into the whole ebook. It'll be a fad, and we'll go back to paper. I now don't buy Kindle books anymore. I've gone back to paper because I missed paper. All right. Now, a future generation, even what my son is growing up into, does not value paper as much. So he's not going to think, oh, I miss paper. He doesn't have a history with it. Now, my wife and I have kept him from devices and mobile things intentionally. And Charlie, that's the thing for you. We decided that Kirk is not going. This is up to you and your wife. I'm not dictating this, but it works for us. We decided that our son would not have any screen time. No TV, no computer screens, no mobile devices, not even touching, messing with them, or even seeing them until after he was 2 years old. So there's been some research to show how kids now, the younger they're exposed, the more they're exposed to screens, they can't figure out reality. It's just like there was a video out a year or two ago with a little girl. She was like a year old, and She was used to an iPad swiping and things, so she could navigate that really well. They put a real book down, and on the cover of the book, she kept trying to swipe it. She did not know how to open the book. She kept swiping the cover, expecting it to change. All right, so that's a big shift because it's affecting our economy. It's affecting a lot of things. Authorship on the blog. Where does truth come from on a blog post? Does it come from the author who wrote it, or from the 1,300 comments from other people all over the place commenting about that blog? So where do you get your truth from? A little bit of both. Who has the authority now? Well, in the paper to digital world, it's shifting now because more people can speak into it. Mobile devices has put the internet in our pockets, and social media has redefined what friend, connection, relationship is redefining all those terms and ideas drastically. I think this is my last one. Generations. Builders, they were the pre-1946. Now the percentages there to the side are actually percentage of Christians. So this is this fits with the post-Christian, the Christian and the post-Christian conversation. But generationally speaking, the builders, those born pre-1946, basically the 1920s to 46, about 65% of them were Christian, evangelical Christians. Boomers, 1946 to 1964, which my parents would be in that category, 35% of them were Christians. Notice how it progresses. Generation X, which some of you guys, your parents are probably in the Boomer to Generation X category based on their age. We were all pretty close in age. Generation X, those who were born in the hippie era. So the Boomers who became hippies, their kids became the Generation Xers, which is Generation X is known as the selfish generation as well. But actually, I think the Boomers are a selfish generation. But anyway, so 22% Christian. Millennials, which is our generation, 1980 to 2000, 15 to 18%, depending on who you talk to and who you read. And then the digital natives, they don't really have a category. Some are calling them Generation Z. Some of them are calling all kind of other kind of things now. Millennials have been called Generation Y. If you see some things about Gen Y, that's millennials. But we don't know. We don't have a clear name. They will name themselves in about 10 years or so. We named ourselves millennials. That one stuck more than the others. But digital natives, those born 2001 through the following, my son, he's not going to know anything but a digital world. I remember pre-computer era. I remember the first time there was a computer in my house. I remember when the first time I saw internet, and it took me years to understand the concept and the dial-up. My son will never have a history of that. He'll have to read a history book or watch a really, really old VHS tape to understand what that is. So how these digital natives, what are they going to be? So there are differences in values. Really, it's a values thing for millennials. Millennials, we value authenticity and openness because moderns, those who were the boomers and builders, they were wanted to present such a good face in the community that they would hide sins and they would hide things. So we vouch for more openness. We are the most diverse generation. We are the most educated generation. The millennials are, and so those are some really big shifts. And the last slide, some micro issues. This is where it kind of gets into more localized that you'll deal with as a pastor. Definitions of family, divorce rates. Susie has two moms. She's in your youth group and she has two moms. We had that in my youth group. We actually had a deacon's wife left him for another woman, but her kids still came to church. So I was discipling two teenage guys whose not only parents are going through a nasty divorce, but their mom was living with and sleeping with another woman. And here are two guys with a Christian framework. One has stuck with his faith and one has tried to love his mom back to the gospel. The other just went off the deep end and has kind of gone from his faith in a lot of ways. So anyways, family definitions, that's going to affect how you pastor. But those larger macro things are feeding into this. Urbanization. If you're in a big city, it's getting bigger, and other cities are starting to become more urbanized than others. The city of Asheville, its downtown scene is growing. Places like Winston, we were not always an urban center like a New York or anything, but we're becoming far more urban. The population of cities are increasing. Each year, the percentage of the total population who live in a city is increasing. Gentrification is becoming a big deal. Now, gentrification is when you take buildings and places in a low income area or in a deprived area, and you start renovating them, and it makes the cost of living for the poor people go up, and they have to go out even further. So there's good and bad things of gentrification. It's good that some old buildings are being restored, and that part of town doesn't look aesthetically as bad, and maybe some new jobs are able to come in. The problem is, overall, it usually hurts the local community a lot more. And we're actually seeing that here in Winston. The whole innovation quarter, that is part of gentrification, but not a lot of people live down there, so it's not affecting a lot of residents, but they are taking old places and restoring them. That's a really big thing if you're into more urban evangelism and church planting. And then local economies. You know, if in my hometown, if Walmart shut down, a lot of people would lose jobs and the economy would crumble. That's just reality. Here we have more diverse economies and health, the hospital, schools, and different things. But these are all affected by what's happening on the global scale, what's happening in the bigger picture thing. So, any comments or questions about any of these? I know I had to fly through that. I'm sorry. I should have saved some more time at the very beginning. But I hope this has been helpful to understand. Your reading will expound this a lot more. And I have a few articles I'm going to post in Blackboard just for supplemental stuff to help you process this more. So, Charlie, if you don't have any questions or harsh criticisms, want to shut us down?